There are moments in life when love becomes less of a feeling and more of a discipline. It's not the kind of love that comes easily, when days are warm and bills are paid, but the kind that shows up exhausted, standing at a bus stop at midnight, still choosing to endure because the people waiting at home need you. That kind of love doesn't sparkle, it sweats. It aches. It stays. Angela Johnson knew this kind of love all too well. At 50, her life had been whittled down to 2 jobs, 1 body, and an unshakable duty to her children. In the mornings, she scrubbed floors in houses she would never afford to live in, inhaling the lemon scent of someone else's wealth. At night, she traded her mop for latex gloves and a badge that read Hospital Custodian Night Shift. She often joked to herself that she lived in the land of disinfectant, bleach by day, ammonia by night. But there was nothing funny about it. Angela's husband, David, had died 10 years earlier in a construction accident. One phone call had split her world into 2 halves, before and after. Before, there had been Sunday barbecues, a savings jar with the word vacation scrawled across it, and the comfort of another pair of shoulders to lean on. After, there was only Angela, her name now synonymous with sacrifice, and 2 children who looked to her with eyes that asked questions she didn't always know how to answer. Marcus was 25 now. He was tall like his father, broad in the chest, with a restlessness that never seemed to settle. He had been the man of the house since he was 15, or at least he thought so. Angela knew that weight had been unfairly placed on him. Lena, her daughter, was just 17, tender and bookish, the kind of girl who clutched her notebooks like shields. Angela loved them with a fierceness that sometimes frightened her. They were her proof of existence, her reason for breathing. But love, even fierce love, does not pay the light bill. One Thursday evening, Angela arrived home after a 14-hour stretch that had left her body leaden. The apartment was dim, the only light coming from the kitchen where Marcus sat, tapping on his phone with quick, impatient thumbs. He didn't look up when she entered. "Marcus," she sighed, dropping her purse onto the sagging couch. "Did you pick Lena up from school?" "She walked," he muttered. Eyes still glued to his screen, Angela clenched her jaw. "I told you." "She's fine, Ma," he interrupted. Then, finally lifting his head, he leaned forward. "Actually, I need to talk to you about something." Angela sank into the chair across from him. Her feet screamed, her back throbbed, but she braced herself. Conversations that started with "I need to talk to you" never ended gently. "I'm done with this trade school thing," Marcus announced. Angela's brow furrowed. "Done? What do you mean done?" "I mean, I'm wasting my time. Welding, mechanics, none of it's going to get me anywhere. I got a chance to invest in something real, a buddy of mine's starting a business. Crypto, stocks, flipping cars, you name it, there's real money to be made." His eyes gleamed, fevered with the promise of shortcuts. Angela stared at him, her exhaustion sharpening into fear. "Marcus, no, absolutely not. You're not throwing away your education for some get-rich-quick nonsense. You think the world is waiting to hand you money? It's not. The world takes, son. It takes, and it keeps taking. You need something solid." Marcus slammed his palm against the table, rattling the salt shaker. "Solid? You mean like you, working yourself to death every day for pennies? I don't want that life, Ma. I'm not going to be stuck like you." The words sliced through her. She tried to steady her breath, but her hands trembled. "You think I chose this? You think this is what I dreamed of as a little girl? I'm breaking myself so you don't have to, and you have the nerve to throw it back in my face." Marcus looked away, jaw tight, but the damage was done. The silence that followed was suffocating. Lena peeked from her bedroom, eyes wide with worry, but quickly shut the door again, retreating from the storm. Angela rose, her body heavy, and carried herself to the bathroom. She turned on the faucet, letting the water run, a thin disguise for the sound of her sobbing. She gripped the edge of the sink and stared at her reflection, tired eyes rimmed with red, a mouth that hadn't smiled in months, hair flecked with strands of silver. She looked like a woman drowning slowly on dry land. She slid down against the wall, her knees pressed to her chest, and whispered to the tiles, to God, to herself. I will not let my son lose his way, even if it kills me, even if I have to give up every last piece of myself. I will not fail them. The bathroom was small, but in that moment it felt like a cathedral. Her whispered vow echoing like a prayer, sealing itself into the cracked grout. Outside, Marcus paced the living room, full of restless ambition. Lena pressed her forehead against her closed door, silently pleading for peace. And Angela, alone on the cold tile floor, made a promise that would shape everything to come. Love, after all, was not about choosing what was easy. It was about choosing what was necessary. By morning, the apartment had settled into the uneasy quiet that follows a storm. Angela rose before the sun because that's when bills seem less threatening, when coffee can still pretend to be courage, and the world hasn't yet asked for more than you have to give. She packed Lena's lunch: peanut butter sandwich, carrot sticks, an apple with one brown freckle near the stem, and left it on the counter with a post-it. Proud of you. Mom, Lena shuffled out, a sweatshirt swallowing her small shoulders, backpack hanging low like a second body. She lifted the post-it with 2 fingers as if it were made of glass and tucked it into the front pocket of her notebook. She didn't say anything about the argument. That was Lena's way. She collected the shards quietly and waited to see how they'd cut. Text me when you get to school, Angela said. Lena nodded, eyes somewhere near the floor. I will. Marcus emerged last, the scent of aftershave and impatience trailing him. He moved the way young men move when they feel the clock has cheated them, too fast for the room they are in, too slow for the life they want. He kissed Angela on the forehead out of habit more than tenderness. I'll be late. Meeting with Kev. Angela didn't ask which Kev or what kind of meeting because she already knew the answer, and also because she was tired of being the wall he bounced off. Be safe, she said, which mothers say when they want to say please don't become someone I can't recognize. On the bus, Angela watched the city shrug itself awake, bakeries lit like tiny theaters, a mail carrier tugging his cart, a boy on a scooter racing the crosswalk signal. She cupped her hands around the paper cup to warm her fingers. At the hospital door, she pulled on her badge and stepped into fluorescent truth. A custodial cart, a stack of clean linens, the impossible hum of medicine trying to outpace mortality. This was the stage where Angela knew her marks. Room 512, then 520. Mop, rinse, wring. Wipe down, disinfect. Replace the trash bag with a snap that sounded too loud in the half-sleep of patients. She greeted the night nurses with the respect of a worker who knows the ribs of the ship. They were all the same crew, even if some wore scrubs and others wore non-slip shoes. Halfway down the cardiac wing, a noise cut through the routine. Not the urgent beeping that makes everyone run, but a sound humans make when they are trying very hard not to be afraid. Angela turned. In 527, an elderly man with a blue-spotted hand had rolled almost sideways, the call button tangled in bedsheets. Oxygen tubing kinked under the wheel of the Roman 4 pole. Mr. Whittaker, Angela said, because she read the chart even when no one expected her to. She entered without ceremony, pressed the call button with her elbow, and straightened the tubing. His breath steadied. She lifted his head, smoothed the pillow, and found the water cup with the bendy straw. Didn't want to trouble nobody, he rasped. You tell me that again and I'm riding you up. She smiled, the kind that shows you the whole truth and not just the polite part. Trouble is what we're here for. A soft chuckle. The nurse arrived, thanked Angela, adjusted the monitor. From the doorway, a man in a charcoal coat watched the scene with the stillness of someone who had come for one reason and would leave with another. He had the careful haircut of a person used to being listened to and the face of a person who had recently been humbled by pain. He didn't step forward. He simply noted the way Angela held Mr. Whittaker's hand until the tremor eased, the way she said we as if the hospital were a family that made room for everyone. The man checked his phone. Richard Anderson, the screen would have said if Angela had been the kind to peek at strangers' phones. He tucked it away and disappeared down the corridor before the moment could become a conversation. At Roosevelt High, Lena kept her head low and her notebooks higher. Her locker door bore a dent shaped vaguely like a basketball, a souvenir from freshman year. The hallway was a river, voices eddying around jokes Lena didn't quite catch and brands she couldn't afford. Two girls leaned on the locker next to hers, glossy ponytails swishing in synchronized dismissal. "You're coming to Carson's, right?" One of them asked the other, eyeing Lena only long enough to decide she didn't exist. "My mom's making me go to Nana's," the other groaned. "Old people smell like peppermint and dust." They laughed. Lena wanted to tell them that old people also smell like safety if you're lucky, like the last time you were small enough to be carried. But her mouth refused to open. Words would only announce her poverty. Silence protected it. Third period English, MS Valdez wrote symbolism in block letters while the class watched the second hand eat its way around the clock's plastic face. "What do we carry?" she asked. "That cannot be seen." The boy in the back whispered. Det and his friends snickered. Lena stared at her hands. She thought of the post-it note. She thought of the grocery list carved into Angela's mind like commandments. She raised her hand halfway, then bowed it back to the desk. You don't volunteer your heart and expect applause. At lunch, Lena unwrapped her sandwich slowly, pretending to savor it so it would last the length of everyone else's cafeteria feast. Her eye snagged on a table near the window. Jordan, the basketball captain, loud and loose-limbed, tossing fries into his mouth with the accuracy of someone who always hits his shot. He caught Lena looking and offered the universal teenage peace treaty, a chin-lifted nod. She startled, looked down, then dared herself to look up again. He was already laughing with someone else. Invisible, safe, lonely. When the final bell released them into the blunt light of afternoon, Lena chose the long route home, the one that passed the library. Books lined up like quiet soldiers. She pressed her palms against the glass and felt their sturdiness. Inside, a little girl in a pink jacket asked her father how to spell adventure. He bent down, showed her the letters with his finger, and Lena had to look away. She wasn't angry at the sweetness of it, only hungry. Her phone buzzed. A text from Angela, "Everything okay?" "Yes, Mom," she typed. Then erased it. Then typed again, "Yes, love you." She slid the phone back into her pocket with the relief of someone who has told the truth in a small way. Across town, Marcus sat in a coffee shop that believed exposed brick could turn caffeine into destiny. His friend Kevin wore a hoodie and the conviction of a preacher. "Listen," Kevin said, flipping his laptop around. A spreadsheet glowed, more hope than math. "You put in 2,000, we flip a car in a week, double up. Or we get on this token now, pre-surge, ride it to the moon." "To the moon," Marcus echoed, liking how the words felt, how they replaced heaviness with helium. "School's a treadmill, man," Kevin continued. "You want to run in place or move?" Marcus pictured Angela's hands, the way the veins rose when she wrung out a mop. He pictured Lena's bent shoulders. He pictured himself 10 years from now, still borrowing hope. "Okay," he said. "I'm in." "Attaboy." Kevin slapped the table a little too loudly. "You won't regret it. But regret is clever. It knows how to wait." During the graveyard hour, when the hospital felt like a ship trying not to wake the ocean, Angela took her break in the staff lounge, a room with one working vending machine and a calendar stuck forever on March. She stirred powdered creamer into coffee that had given up being coffee. The man in the charcoal coat appeared in the doorway as if invited by the clock. He hesitated, then stepped in. "Excuse me," he said. "I think I saw you earlier. Room 527, you helped a patient." Angela glanced up, the instinctive appraisal of a woman who has met every kind of stranger and knows the small differences that matter. "I help a lot of patients," she said, neither proud nor modest. "It's the job." He smiled, the kind that tried not to intrude. "I'm Richard Anderson. My mother's down the hall, hip replacement. She hates hospitals. He paused, recalibrating. "I just wanted to say I noticed. Not everyone notices the person who notices." Angela offered a nod that could be read as thank you or let's keep this simple. "How's your mother doing?" "She's stubborn," he said, and the words softened his face, "which I'm told is hereditary." Angela allowed herself the smallest laugh. "Stubborn is a life skill." He glanced at her badge. "You've been here long?" "Long enough to know where they hide the decent coffee," she said. Then, because kindness is a currency she believes in, she stood and pointed. "Not that one. The nurses on 3 stock theirs like it's Fort Knox. Ask for Rochelle." Richard followed her gesture with his eyes, surprised at the way such a small piece of insider knowledge made him feel relieved. "Thank you," he said. He waited a beat too long, a man who had more words but wasn't sure he had earned the right to say them. If there's anything I can." Angela shook her head gently. "We all have our parts to play, Mr. Anderson." "Richard," he said, offering the correction as a bridge, not a demand. "Angela," she replied, not taking his hand but not refusing it either. He left, and she sat again, staring into the coffee as if it held a map. She thought of how hard it is for pride and need to share the same room. She thought of Marcus, the heat behind his words. She thought of Lena, silent as snowfall. The lull shattered, an alarm's flat cry. Angela rose before the coffee could cool. In 527A, Mr. Whittaker's monitor drew a staccato skyline. Nurses flooded in, a doctor's voice cut into the air, orders and answers weaving a net. Angela slipped to the edges, clearing space, moving cords, making the urgent look less like chaos. She caught Mr. Whittaker's eye. He was afraid. She mouthed, "I'm here." Sometimes those 2 words are all medicine has left. By the time the rhythm steadied, Angela's heart had braided itself into the room. The doctor nodded, a quick professional thanks. Angela exhaled, wheeled the trash bin away, restored the world to its ordinary mess. Richard had been standing in the corridor again, summoned by the alarm the way families are drawn to thresholds, as if proximity could outrun fate. He watched Angela's calm, the competence without performance, the way she did not make a spectacle of goodness. He thought of all the places where money speaks loudly, and how here, in this bright hum, it merely asks permission. When Angela pushed the cart past him, he said nothing. He only watched the way she guided it, steady, purposeful, like a person steering a life with one hand while the other held too many fragile things. That night, at the apartment, Lena laid out her homework on the kitchen table because the table was where courage looked like ordinary effort. Angela arrived after midnight, shoulders bowed, shoes in her hand to keep the floor quiet. "You should be asleep," she whispered. "I wanted to wait up," Lena said, eyes shining with the kind of tired that isn't fixed by sleep. "Mom, do you think being strong always hurts this much?" Angela gathered her, cheek to her hair. "Only when it's working." They stood like that for a while, 2 silhouettes in a kitchen that had seen too much and not enough. In his room, Marcus scrolled through messages that promised him the universe for a down payment. He didn't hear the whisper of his mother's prayer. He didn't see the post-it in Lena's notebook. He didn't feel the way fate, patient and precise, was fitting the next piece into place. Invisible bruises bloomed where no one clapped for them, and still, morning would come. Angela's bones still ached from her night shift, but she forced herself into the rhythm of Saturday chores. Laundry piled like a mountain range on the couch, the steady hum of the vacuum rolling over worn carpet. These were the little battles of her life, endless, ordinary, yet somehow just as exhausting as the big ones. Marcus was already gone, leaving behind nothing but an empty cereal bowl in the sink and the faint scent of his cologne. Lena sat cross-legged at the kitchen table, highlighters scattered around her textbook. Her quiet concentration was both a comfort and a reminder. Angela carried this whole family on her back, but she couldn't carry them forever. A knock at the door startled her. Not the impatient rap of a neighbor or the heavy thump of a bill collector, but a measured knock, polite, deliberate. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and opened it. Standing on the small porch was the man from the hospital. The charcoal coat was gone, replaced by a simple button-down shirt. His face carried the kind of calm that belongs to men who have weathered storms and learned not to fear the rain. "Angela Johnson?" he asked. She hesitated. "Yes. I hope I'm not intruding. My name's Richard Anderson. We crossed paths at the hospital. My mother was recovering on the 5th floor." Angela remembered him then, the way he had lingered in the corridor, the quiet gratitude in his eyes. She nodded cautiously. "I remember." Richard shifted, almost awkward in his politeness. "This is a little unorthodox, I know, but I was moved by what I saw. You helped that patient, the older gentleman. You didn't hesitate. Most people don't even see the invisible ones. You did. And," he stopped, collecting himself, "I'd like to help you, if you'd let me." Angela's hand tightened around the dish towel. "Help me?" "I've been fortunate," Richard said. "Business has treated me well despite some personal setbacks, and I believe in second chances, in supporting people who carry more than their share. If you'll allow it, I could help with your children's education." "Your son, your daughter?" Angela stiffened. Pride rose in her chest like a shield. "Mr. Anderson, I don't take charity. My children are my responsibility." Richard raised his palms, backing off. "I understand. I'm not here to offend. Only, sometimes, responsibility breaks people who deserve better. I don't want to see that happen to you." Before Angela could answer, Marcus pulled into the driveway. His car was old but loud, and his arrival filled the air with the sharp tang of exhaust. He stepped out, spotted Richard, and frowned. "What's going on here?" Marcus asked, his voice edged with suspicion. "This is Mr. Anderson," Angela said carefully. "We met at the hospital." Richard extended his hand. "Marcus, right? Your mother speaks with pride about you." Marcus didn't shake it. His eyes narrowed, measuring the stranger. "And why exactly are you here?" "Offering some assistance," Richard said simply. "Nothing more." Marcus's expression shifted from suspicion to interest. "Assistance, like financial?" "Marcus," Angela warned, but Marcus ignored her. He stepped closer, his tone quickening with hope. "Look, Mr. Anderson, I'm trying to start something, a business. My friends and I have plans, but we just need some capital. You want to help? This is your chance." Angela felt the blood drain from her face. "Marcus, stop." Richard's gaze softened, not at Marcus's words, but at the desperation behind them. "A business, you say? That's ambitious. But money isn't the first step. Guidance is. Discipline, and I can see your mother's given you plenty of both." Marcus scoffed. "Discipline doesn't pay rent. Neither does recklessness." Angela snapped, her patience breaking. "You think shortcuts will save you? They'll ruin you, Marcus, and I won't stand by and watch it happen." For a moment, the air felt like it might shatter, the sun bristling against his mother, the stranger caught in the crossfire. Lena's chair scraped against the floor as she stood, wide-eyed, clutching her book to her chest like a shield. Richard broke the tension with a quiet firmness. "Marcus, I'm not here to hand out money, but if you're serious about building something, I can show you how it's done the right way. No tricks, no scams, real work, real opportunity." Angela turned on him, defensive. "I don't need you interfering in my family." "I know," Richard said gently, "but maybe your family needs more than one person holding it all together." The room went still. Angela swallowed hard, fighting the urge to slam the door in his face. Because deep down, beneath the layers of pride and weariness, she knew he was right. She couldn't carry everything forever. but admitting that felt like betrayal of her late husband, of herself, of the vow she whispered on the bathroom floor only nights before. She met Richard's steady gaze and said, "Thank you, Mr. Anderson, but we'll manage." He inclined his head, not pressing further. "If you change your mind, I'll be around, my card." He left it on the porch railing, then stepped back. "Take care of yourself, Angela." When he was gone, Marcus rounded on her. "Are you crazy? That man's offering us a way out and you just shut him down?" Angela's voice trembled, not with weakness but with fire. "Because I will not let my son sell his soul for handouts. We fight for what we earn. That's the only way it lasts." Marcus shook his head, muttering curses under his breath as he stormed inside. Lena watched from the doorway, silent as ever, her eyes full of questions no one seemed willing to answer. Angela stood alone on the porch, staring at the neat rectangle of cardstock Richard had left behind. His name, embossed in gold letters, seemed to gleam in the afternoon sun like a key she refused to turn. And still, she tucked it into her pocket. Angela had not planned on company that Sunday. She had hoped for a quiet day, laundry folded, Lena catching up on homework, Marcus perhaps willing to sit at the table long enough for a meal without rolling his eyes at her. But family rarely arrives when it's welcome. It shows up with baggage, opinions, and voices that sound too much like your own. Cynthia knocked once and let herself in, the way older sisters do when they believe they hold a permanent key to your life. She carried a tote bag stuffed with church pamphlets and gossip wrapped in righteousness. "Angela," she announced, arms outstretched as if she were arriving to bless the house. "You look tired, baby sister. Lord, you work too hard." Angela kissed her cheek lightly, the kind of kiss that says, "I love you, but please don't stay too long." "Work doesn't wait, Cynthia. Sit down, I'll put on some tea." Cynthia made herself at home, smoothing her skirt, her eyes scanning the apartment like a detective looking for evidence. They landed on the business card, still tucked under a coaster on the table. "What's this?" she asked, lifting it before Angela could intercept. She read aloud in a tone that dripped with suspicion. "Richard Anderson, Anderson Holdings." Angela stiffened. "It's nothing." "Nothing?" Cynthia raised an eyebrow, savoring the word. "A wealthy man leaves his card in your house and it's nothing? Angela, please. I wasn't born yesterday. What's going on?" Before Angela could answer, Marcus strode into the room, hearing the name and pouncing on it like fresh prey. "Mr. Anderson's trying to help us. Finally, someone who sees what we're worth. But Mom," he gestured at Angela, his voice bristling, "Mom would rather scrub floors until she dies than let us take a chance." Cynthia's mouth curled into something between satisfaction and pity. "So it's true. A rich man sniffing around a tired widow and my nephew thinking he's the ticket out. Angela, don't you see the danger here?" Angela set the teapot down harder than she meant to. The clatter made Lena flinch in the corner where she had been pretending to read. "Cynthia, don't start. You don't know him." "I don't need to," Cynthia shot back. "I've seen this story before. A man with money doesn't hand it out without wanting something in return. Respect yourself, sister. Respect David's memory." The mention of her late husband was a knife Angela had grown used to, but it still cut deep. She gripped the counter until her knuckles whitened. "Respect? You think I haven't been killing myself for 10 years out of respect? You think I'd let any man, rich or poor, demean what I've built for my children?" Marcus folded his arms. "So what, we just stay poor forever because of your pride?" Cynthia gave him a pointed look. "Your mother is right to be careful. Men like that aren't saviors, Marcus. They're hunters, don't forget it." Angela's voice broke, sharp but trembling. "Enough, both of you. You think I don't lie awake at night wondering how to stretch $1 into 3? You think I don't dream of giving you more than this little apartment, more than hand-me-down shoes and second-shift dinners. But I will not." She pointed to the card still dangling in Cynthia's hand. "I will not risk my family's dignity for a shortcut." Silence filled the room. The only sound was the whistle of the kettle, shrill and insistent, like the world demanding an answer she didn't have. Lena finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. Maybe it's not a shortcut. Maybe it's a chance. All eyes turned to her. She flushed under their gaze, but she kept going. Mom, you always tell me courage isn't about being reckless. It's about doing the right thing even when it's hard. What if saying yes is the right thing this time? What if Mr. Anderson really just wants to help? Angela's heart ached at her daughter's innocence, her willingness to believe the best in people. It was the same innocence that made Lena a target at school, the same innocence Angela had fought to protect. Cynthia scoffed. Child, the world doesn't hand out kindness. Don't be fooled. But the seed had been planted. Angela could feel it, pressing against the walls of her pride. Richard Anderson's offer wasn't going away. Neither were Marcus's restless ambitions or Lena's quiet longing for relief. Cynthia gathered her things, satisfied she had delivered her warning. At the door she turned, her silhouette framed in the late afternoon light. Angela, you've survived this long without leaning on anyone. Don't forget, that's your strength. Don't let some man take it from you. The door closed, and with it, the pretense of peace. Marcus stormed to his room, muttering about missed opportunities. Lena stayed at the table, biting her lip, caught between loyalty to her mother and hope for something different. Angela sat alone, the steam from the untouched tea curling like ghosts around her face. She pulled the card from beneath the coaster and held it in her hand, staring at the name embossed in gold. She whispered to herself, almost angrily, "Strength isn't supposed to feel this lonely." And in that moment, she wondered, not for the first time, if the burden she carried was really strength at all, or just another way of breaking. Richard Anderson lived in a house too large for one man. Every room echoed with what used to be. The photographs were gone. He had taken them down years ago, unable to face his daughter's smiling face, his ex-wife's hand resting lightly on the child's shoulder. But the spaces on the walls remained, pale squares of memory against darker paint, proof that something had once lived there. On Sunday evenings, when the city grew quiet, Richard poured himself a glass of water and sat in the leather chair by the window. Not whiskey, not wine, those had been temptations he had surrendered after the divorce. Just water, clear and plain, as if it could rinse the bitterness from his life. That was where he sat when his sister, Margaret, called. "You sound tired," she said. "I'm fine," Richard replied, though the truth pressed against his chest. "You went to the hospital again?" "Yes, Mother's stubborn as ever, but she'll recover." Margaret hesitated. "And you saw her, didn't you?" Richard didn't ask how she knew. Sisters had a way of reading the silences between words. "Yes," he admitted. "The woman who works there, Angela, you've mentioned her twice now. She's different, Margaret. She doesn't just clean the rooms, she sees people. She looked at that old man in 527 as if he mattered more than the machines. Do you know how rare that is? Most people walk past suffering like it's wallpaper." Margaret's voice softened. "And she reminds you of Claire, doesn't she?" Richard swallowed hard. Claire, his daughter, 17 years old when leukemia took her, leaving behind a bedroom full of unfinished poems and a mother who blamed Richard for not being God. The divorce followed swiftly, a house divided by grief that had no patience for forgiveness. "Yes," he whispered. "Angela has the same fierceness, the same way of carrying too much and never setting it down. When I look at her, I see what I failed to be for Claire, a protector, a presence." "Richard," Margaret said gently, "don't turn this woman into your penance. She has her own story, her own battles." "I know." He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "But maybe helping her family is the one thing I can still do right. I couldn't save my daughter, but I can ease someone else's burden." Margaret was quiet for a long moment. "Then do it carefully. Don't make promises you can't keep, and don't mistake guilt for love." The next day, Richard found himself at the community center, a place he hadn't visited in years. It smelled of basketballs, chalk dust, and hope gone slightly stale. A flyer caught his eye. Scholarship Fund for Underprivileged Youth, donations welcome. He thought of Marcus, restless and angry, ready to gamble his future on shortcuts. He thought of Lena, eyes wide with questions, carrying her notebooks like shields. And he thought of Angela, stooped shoulders, tired hands, still unyielding. He wrote a check, but it didn't feel like enough. Later that afternoon, he stood outside Angela's apartment again, the card she hadn't called still tucked in his wallet. He almost turned away, but the door opened before he could. Lena stood there, her hair pulled back, a cautious smile on her lips. "Mr. Anderson?" she asked. "Hello, Lena." He shifted, suddenly aware of how strange it must look, a wealthy man lingering at the door of a widow's home. "I came to see your mother. Is she in?" Lena nodded and let him in. Angela appeared from the kitchen, drying her hands on a dish towel. Her face hardened when she saw him. "I told you, Mr. Anderson." "Richard," he corrected gently. "Please, I'm not here to force anything on you. I thought you should know why I care." Angela crossed her arms. "I don't need your reasons. I need you to respect my boundaries." Richard exhaled, running a hand through his hair. For a man accustomed to boardrooms and contracts, this was unfamiliar territory. There was no negotiation here, only truth. "My daughter died when she was 17, he said quietly. The room stilled. Even Marcus, who had just emerged from his room, froze at the words. "She fought for 2 years, Richard continued, his voice steady but thin. "Chemo, hospitals, the whole endless war. And I threw money at it, thinking money could beat death. It couldn't, and when she was gone, her mother left too, said I cared more about control than comfort. She was probably right." He looked at Angela, his eyes raw. "I can't change what happened, but when I saw you at the hospital, the way you looked at that patient like he mattered, I remembered what it felt like to be seen. To matter, and I thought maybe, just maybe, I could help someone else matter too." Angela's face softened despite herself. Her arms lowered, but her pride still held her voice steady. "I'm sorry about your daughter, truly, but my family is not a project for you to fix. We're not here to heal your guilt." Richard nodded. "I understand. I just needed you to know the truth." Lena's eyes shimmered, caught between sorrow and wonder. Marcus looked away, uncomfortable with the weight of grief he couldn't dismiss with bravado. Angela, silent for a moment, finally said, "If you want to help, don't do it with money. Do it with presence, real presence. The kind my children can trust." Richard met her gaze and said, "Then that's what I'll offer." That night, Angela sat at the kitchen table long after her children had gone to bed. Richard's confession lingered in the air like incense, impossible to ignore. She thought of Cynthia's warning, Marcus's hunger for shortcuts, Lena's quiet plea for hope. She thought of her own reflection in the bathroom mirror, whispering vows into cracked tiles. She pressed her palms together, whispering into the dark, "Lord, don't let me mistake pride for wisdom. Show me which burdens are mine to carry, and which ones I can finally set down." Outside, the city pulsed on. Inside, Angela's heart wrestled with something unfamiliar, not fear, not even hope, but the possibility of trust. Marcus could never sit still. Even as a boy, he drummed on tables, bounced his knees, chased after anything faster than him. Restlessness had always lived under his skin, but now, at 25, it had hardened into hunger. He wanted out of the apartment, out of hand-me-down clothes, out of watching his mother break herself in half to keep the lights on. Angela thought Richard's confession might have sobered him. For one night, Marcus had been quiet, eyes shadowed with something almost like respect. But by the next morning, the gleam of quick money was back, and with it the lies. It began with a phone call. Marcus sat on the stoop outside, the cold biting his fingers as he held the phone to his ear. "I got the cash," he whispered, though his heart raced. "You sure?" Kevin's voice buzzed through the static. "Positive. We'll flip this car by the weekend. I'll double it easy." Marcus hung up, slid the wad of bills deeper into his jacket pocket, and tried not to think about the small metal box in Angela's bedroom closet, the one she thought no one knew about. It had been David's box once, full of insurance papers and a folded flag from the funeral. Angela had tucked her savings into it, dollar by dollar, like seeds for a harvest that never came. Marcus had taken nearly all of it. He told himself it wasn't stealing. It was borrowing. It was investing. It was finally doing what his mother couldn't, finding a way out. Angela noticed the missing money 2 nights later. She had come home from her shift, hands raw from bleach, and gone straight to the closet. The box was lighter, too light. She counted twice, then a third time. Half of what she'd saved gone. Her stomach dropped, but her mind sharpened. There were only 3 people who could have touched it. Lena would never. That left Marcus. When he returned after midnight, smelling faintly of gasoline and bravado, Angela was waiting at the kitchen table. "Where is it?" she asked. Marcus froze. "Where's what?" "Don't play with me, the money from your father's box." Her voice was low, steady, dangerous. "It's gone." He shifted, defensive. "I borrowed it. I'll pay it back, Mom, with interest." Angela stood, her chair scraping against the floor. "Borrowed? That was our safety, Marcus. That was Lena's college, our rent if I lost a job. And you took it for what? Some scheme?" "It's not a scheme." His voice cracked, but he doubled down. "This is opportunity, Mom. The kind you never gave me. You're so stuck in your world of scrubbing floors and stretching pennies that you can't see the future when it's right in front of you." Angela's breath caught in her throat. "You think I never dreamed of more? You think I wanted this life? Everything I do, every hour I bleed at those jobs is for you and your sister. And you spit on it." The room pulsed with silence. Lena peeked from the hallway, clutching her notebook to her chest, her eyes wide. Marcus's fists clenched. For a moment, he looked like he might shatter the table between them. Instead, he whispered, "I'm not going to end up like you." Then he turned, storming into the night, the door slamming behind him. Angela sat down hard, her body trembling. She pressed her face into her hands, whispering into the dark, "Lord, help me. Don't let him be lost." Lena crept closer, her voice trembling. "Mom?" Angela reached for her, pulling her into her lap like she was still a little girl. "It's all right, baby, it's all right." But it wasn't. By the weekend, Marcus's gamble had collapsed. The car deal went wrong. Kevin vanished with most of the cash, leaving Marcus with nothing but a dented fender and a promise of more next time. There was no next time. When the police stopped him on the corner, asking questions about stolen parts, Marcus's world cracked. They held him for hours, long enough for his pride to shrivel, long enough for his mother to find out. Angela arrived at the precinct in her work uniform, exhaustion clinging to her like sweat. The officer explained the situation. Marcus hadn't been charged, not yet, but he was on thin ice. Angela looked at her son through the glass, slouched, humiliated, still too stubborn to meet her eyes. In that moment, she felt both fury and heartbreak. This was her boy, David's boy, the one she had prayed over since he was in her arms. And here he was, slipping through her fingers. When they finally released him, Marcus shuffled toward her. She stood still, arms crossed, not rushing to embrace him. "You nearly destroyed us," she said, her voice low. "I was trying to save us," he muttered. Angela shook her head, tears welling. "No, you were trying to save yourself, and you almost lost everything that mattered." She turned and walked out into the cold night. Marcus followed, but for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if she'd wait for him to catch up. Angela felt the stares before she heard the whispers. At church on Sunday, the place that once held her like a second home, eyes followed her pew to pew. The story of Marcus's arrest had spread faster than any sermon. No charges had stuck, but that didn't matter. In communities like theirs, rumors didn't need proof, they needed only fuel. "Poor Angela," someone murmured near the vestibule. "Hard to raise a boy alone," another added, the kind of pity that stings more than insult. Angela lifted her chin and kept walking, Lena tucked close at her side. Marcus hadn't come. He said he was too tired, but she knew he was too ashamed, or maybe too angry. After service, Cynthia cornered her by the coffee urns. "I heard," Cynthia began, her tone carrying both concern and judgment like sugar stirred into vinegar. "The whole neighborhood's talking, Angela. What were you thinking? Letting Marcus fall in with those boys? If David were alive?" "Don't," Angela cut her off. The word came sharper than she intended, her throat raw. "Don't bring David into this." Cynthia pressed her lips together, then leaned closer. "This wouldn't have happened if you'd accepted help when it was offered. That Anderson man, he's willing. Everyone can see he's taken an interest. But you," she shook her head. "Your pride is killing you, and now it's dragging Marcus down too." Angela's fists tightened at her sides. "I won't be beholden to a man I barely know. I won't let my children think survival comes from handouts." "Handouts?" Cynthia's eyes widened. "Is that what you call it? Or are you just afraid to admit you can't do this alone?" Angela turned away before the tears could fall, before Cynthia could see the truth wobbling under her armor. That night, Angela sat on the edge of her bed, the small metal box open on her lap. Empty. The savings she had clung to like a lifeline gone. She felt the weight of it not just in dollars, but in dreams. College for Lena, security, breathing room, all stolen by Marcus's gamble. She pressed her palms together and prayed, though her words came out jagged. "Lord, I don't mind breaking. I've done it before. But don't let my children break with me. Don't let them think my sacrifice was for nothing." A soft knock at the door startled her. Lena peeked in, holding a plate of toast. "You didn't eat dinner," she said. Angela forced a smile and accepted it. "Thank you, baby." Lena lingered, then asked quietly, "Mom, do you think Marcus will be okay?" Angela hesitated. The truth was heavy, but she softened it for her daughter. "He's lost right now, but lost doesn't mean gone. We'll find him again." Lena nodded, though her eyes betrayed the doubt she couldn't voice. 2 days later, Angela's world cracked wider. At the hospital, she overheard 2 nurses in the lounge. "Her boy was picked up by the cops," one whispered. "No wonder she's working herself to the bone." "She's proud," the other said. "Won't accept help even when it's right in front of her." Angela turned away before they saw her, shame burning her ears. She carried the weight of their words all the way home. When she reached her door, Richard Anderson was waiting on the stoop. He rose as she approached, his expression calm but intent. "I heard about Marcus," he said. Angela froze, her jaw tightening. "And who told you that? Does it matter?" His voice was steady. "News travels. I didn't come to judge you. I came because I want to help." Angela's defenses flared. "I told you, Mr. Anderson." "Richard," he corrected softly. "Angela, listen to me. This isn't charity. This is me standing beside you, not above you, not in front of you, beside you. Let me pay Lena's tuition. Let me find Marcus honest work before he sinks deeper. Let me do something." Angela's throat tightened. Pride screamed at her to refuse. But behind it, exhaustion whispered a crueler truth. She could not carry this family alone much longer. Still, she shook her head. "I can't let you fix what's broken in my house. That's my burden." Richard's gaze softened, but his words pressed like balm. "Angela, you're not broken, you're tired, and there's a difference." For the first time in years, her eyes filled with tears she couldn't blink away. She turned quickly, fumbling with her keys. "I don't know what you want from me," she whispered. "Nothing," he said. "Only the chance to matter again." She didn't answer. She stepped inside, closing the door softly behind her. But the words followed her into the dark, clinging like hope she didn't know she needed. The apartment was too quiet that night. Angela sat at the kitchen table long after Lena had gone to bed, staring at the empty metal box in front of her. It seemed smaller now, hollow not just of money, but of the future she'd been piecing together dollar by dollar. She pressed the lid shut with a trembling hand and whispered, "Lord, I don't know how much more I can give." The knock came soft, almost apologetic. For a moment, she thought it was Marcus, finally home from whatever corner of the city he'd vanished into. But when she opened the door, Richard stood there instead, his hands deep in his coat pockets. "I'm sorry to come so late," he said, "but I need you to hear me, all of it." Angela sighed, already weary. "Richard, please," he said gently, "just 5 minutes." She hesitated, then stepped aside. He stood in her small living room, looking out of place against the threadbare couch and faded rug. But his voice was steady, almost reverent when he began. "You think I'm offering help out of pity," Richard said. "But pity is cheap. It's given from a distance. What I'm offering comes from something else, something I've carried too long." Angela crossed her arms. "You told me about your daughter. I'm sorry for your loss, truly. But that doesn't mean my family is your second chance." Richard nodded. "I know, but you deserve to know why I see you the way I do." He took a breath, his eyes unfocused as though seeing another time. "When Claire was sick, the house filled with machines. Beeping, blinking, always reminding us of the battle we were losing. I thought money could hold her here. Specialists, treatments, private hospitals. But when she looked at me, do you know what she asked? Not for more medicine. She asked if I would just sit and read to her. Be present, she said, and I wasn't. I kept thinking there'd be time for that later. Once I'd fixed everything, later never came." Angela felt her chest tighten. "When she died," Richard continued, "my wife couldn't forgive me, said I'd tried to buy my way out of fatherhood. She was right. I left that hospital with more money than most, but nothing worth living for. And then I saw you. Saw the way you stood beside that old man, not as a custodian, but as a witness. You gave him what I couldn't give my own child, presence, dignity, humanity. That's why I can't look away." Silence filled the room. The refrigerator hummed, a clock ticked, but neither of them moved. Finally, Angela spoke, her voice softer than she meant. "You think helping me will bring her back?" Richard shook his head. "No. Nothing will bring her back, but maybe it can bring me back. Maybe it can bring something good into a world I failed before." Angela sat slowly, her hands trembling. Pride and weariness wrestled inside her, but the truth of his words reached a place she rarely let anyone touch. She had carried her burden alone for so long that the idea of sharing it, even with a man carrying his own scars, felt dangerous. And yet freeing. Before she could answer, the front door creaked open. Marcus stumbled in, his hoodie stained, his face pale with exhaustion. He froze when he saw Richard. "What's he doing here?" Marcus demanded. Angela's voice sharpened. "Marcus, where have you been?" "Out," he muttered. "None of your business." "None of my business," she snapped. "You steal from me, you shame this family, and you think it's none of my business." Marcus's jaw clenched. He turned to Richard, pointing. "And what about him? Some rich guy swoops in and suddenly he's family. That's a joke." Richard didn't flinch. "I'm not here to replace anyone, Marcus, least of all your father. I'm here because I believe in what your mother has built, and because I see potential in you that you're too angry to see in yourself." Marcus laughed bitterly. "Potential? All I see is a dead end." Angela stepped forward, her voice trembling. "That's what you choose to see, but I see my son. I see the boy who used to build Lego towers for his sister, who promised me after your father died that you'd protect this family. That boy is still in there, Marcus, but you're letting your anger bury him." Marcus's eyes flickered, but he masked it with defiance. "You don't know what it's like to want more, Mom." Angela's voice broke. "I want more every day, but I will not lose you to shortcuts. Not after everything I've lost already." The room went still. Richard looked at Marcus, his voice steady. "You think I don't know about shortcuts? They cost me my daughter. Don't make the same mistake." Marcus faltered, his fists unclenching. He looked away, muttering, "You don't understand." But his voice lacked the fire it once carried. Angela turned back to Richard. "Why are you really here tonight?" Richard met her eyes. "Because you don't have to carry this alone anymore, not unless you choose to." For the first time in years, Angela felt the walls she'd built start to crack. She wasn't ready to let them fall, not yet, but she could see the light seeping through. That night, long after Richard left, Angela sat in the dark with Lena asleep in the next room and Marcus pacing quietly in his. She whispered into the silence, "Maybe we're all carrying ghosts. Maybe it's time we let someone else help carry them." And for the first time, she didn't feel entirely alone. Morning light crept through the blinds, thin and gray painting stripes across the kitchen floor. Angela stood at the counter, pouring coffee into a chipped mug. The silence in the apartment was different now, not heavy with anger as it had been after Marcus's arrest, but fragile, like glass that might shatter if touched the wrong way. She heard him before she saw him. Marcus shuffled into the kitchen, his shoulders hunched, his eyes rimmed with fatigue. He hadn't slept much, she could tell. For once, his swagger was gone. "Mom," he said quietly. Angela didn't turn right away. She added sugar to her cup, stirred slowly, gave him time to gather himself. When she finally looked up, her gaze was steady. "Yes." Marcus shifted on his feet like a boy again, not the man he tried so hard to be. I'm sorry." The words landed awkwardly, like a language he didn't speak often. For the money, for yelling, for everything. Angela's throat tightened, but she kept her voice even. "Do you know what sorry means, Marcus?" He frowned. "It means I regret it." "No." She set her mug down with a soft thud. "It means change. It means you do something different so you never have to say it again." Marcus lowered his eyes. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then, almost reluctantly, he said, "Richard offered me a job." Angela's brow furrowed. "A job? He's got some company that contracts repairs. Said I could start learning the ropes. Real work, paychecks, not quick money." He looked up, his voice laced with shame. "I told him I'd think about it." Angela studied him. For the first time in months, maybe years, she saw a crack in his armor, not defeat, humility. "You should take it," she said softly. "Not for me, not for him, for yourself." Marcus nodded, slow and uncertain, but it was enough. That afternoon, Richard stopped by again. He carried no business card, no speech, only a bag of groceries in one hand. Lena answered the door this time. "I thought maybe your mom could use a break from cooking," Richard said with a small smile. Lena hesitated, then smiled back. "She'll say she doesn't need it, but thank you." Angela tried to protest when she saw him. "You don't have to." "I know," Richard interrupted gently, "but I want to." She sighed, letting him set the bag on the counter. Carrots, chicken, fresh bread, the kind of food she rarely allowed herself to buy. Marcus appeared from his room, awkward in the doorway. He avoided Richard's eyes at first, then finally forced himself to speak. "About the job, if the offer's still there, I'll take it." Richard studied him carefully, as if weighing his sincerity. Then he nodded. "It's still there, but understand something, Marcus. Work isn't a punishment. It's a discipline. If you come ready to learn. No shortcuts." Marcus swallowed. "I understand." Angela watched the exchange, her heart swelling with equal parts relief and fear. Relief that her son might be finding his way back. Fear that it could all unravel just as quickly. That evening, the four of them, Angela, Lena, Marcus, and Richard, sat down to dinner together. The table was small, the plates mismatched, but the meal was warm. Lena laughed at one of Richard's stories about his sister Margaret, and even Marcus cracked a smile. For a brief moment, Angela let herself imagine what life could be like if the walls of struggle weren't always pressing in. But as she gathered the dishes, Cynthia's voice from days earlier echoed in her head. "Men like that aren't saviors, Angela, they are hunters." She glanced at Richard, who was helping Lena clear the table, and wondered which was true. Later that night, Marcus knocked softly on her door. "Mom?" She looked up from her sewing. "Yes, baby." He leaned against the frame, his eyes glistening. "I don't know how to fix everything I messed up, but I'll try. I promise I'll try." Angela set her sewing aside, reached for his hand, and squeezed it. "That's all I ask. Try and don't stop." For the first time in years, Marcus let her hug him without pulling away. In the stillness after he left, Angela prayed again, but this time her words were lighter. Thank you for cracks in the dark. Thank you for beginnings, even when they are small. And somewhere deep inside, she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, her family could still find its way back to wholeness. The night was heavy with summer heat, the kind that clung to the walls and pressed into lungs. Angela tossed in her bed, sleep skittering just out of reach. She had begun to hope again, hope for Marcus, who had started waking up early for his new job with Richard's crew, hope for Lena, whose laughter had returned in small bursts. Hope, though, is fragile. It attracts storms the way light attracts moths. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. 1:47 a.m., a number she didn't recognize. Hello? Static, then a young man's voice, Marcus, panicked, breathless. Mom, it's bad, I'm sorry, I didn't know they'd. A crash cut through the line, then muffled shouting. Stay away, Mom, don't come here. The call dropped. Angela sat bolt upright, heart pounding. She pulled on her shoes with trembling hands, whispering the same prayer over and over, keep him alive, keep him alive. Marcus hadn't told her everything. He'd cut ties with Kevin. Yes, but debts don't dissolve just because you walk away. The men Kevin had borrowed from wanted their money back, and now Marcus was the one they found. They cornered him in an abandoned lot behind a shuttered grocery store. 2 men, hard-eyed, one gripping a bat. Your friend owes us, the taller one said. And he skipped. That makes you the replacement. I don't have it, Marcus said, hands raised. I'm working now, I can pay, just give me. The bat swung, striking the ground inches from his feet. No more chances, kid. By the time Angela reached the lot, her breath ragged from running, the scene was chaos. Marcus stood against the wall, cornered, while the 2 men closed in. Without thinking, Angela screamed his name and charged forward. Leave him alone! Her voice tore through the night. The men turned, startled. One sneered. Who's this, Mama Bear? Angela spread her arms, placing herself in front of her son. If you want him, you'll have to go through me. Marcus shouted, Mom, no, but she didn't move. The shorter man shoved her back with the bat's handle. She stumbled but held her ground, fire in her eyes. He's my son, you will not touch him. Something in her defiance gave them pause, but anger is a cruel master. It doesn't always stop when it should. The bat swung again, this time connecting with her shoulder. Pain shot through her body, sharp and electric. Marcus lunged forward, roaring, stop. He threw himself at the man with a force born not of strength, but of desperation. The struggle knocked the bat aside. Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone must have called the police. The men cursed, retreating into the night. This isn't over, one shouted, but the words were hollow against the approaching red and blue lights. Angela collapsed to her knees, clutching her arm. Marcus fell beside her, shaking, tears cutting tracks down his face. Mom, I'm sorry, I never wanted this. I thought I could handle it, I thought. She pressed her good hand to his cheek, forcing his eyes to hers. Marcus, listen to me. Nothing in this world is worth losing your soul. Nothing. Promise me right here, right now, you're done with them. I promise, he whispered, sobbing. I swear it, Mom, I'll never go back. At the hospital, under the harsh white lights she knew too well, Angela lay with her arm in a sling, bruises blooming across her ribs. Richard arrived as dawn broke, Lena clinging to his hand. He took one look at Angela, battered but unbroken, and his eyes filled with something between sorrow and reverence. You threw yourself in front of them, he said, voice shaking. I'm a mother, Angela replied simply. That's what we do. Richard bowed his head as if her words were scripture. You shouldn't have to fight alone anymore. Lena pressed herself into her mother's side, whispering, Don't ever scare me like that again. Angela kissed the top of her daughter's hair, tasting salt. I'll always protect you, always. Across the room, Marcus sat hunched in a chair, his face pale with guilt. When he finally spoke, his voice broke. Mom, I almost cost you your life. And for what? For greed, for pride, I don't deserve forgiveness. Angela reached out her uninjured hand, palm open. You don't have to deserve it, Marcus. You just have to choose it. Forgiveness is a door, walk through it. Slowly, hesitantly, Marcus placed his hand in hers, and for the first time since David's death, Angela felt her family tether back to her, not by fear, not by struggle, but by love raw enough to mend. That morning, as sunlight spilled into the hospital room, Richard spoke softly, almost to himself. Sometimes it takes a storm to remind us what's worth saving. Angela closed her eyes, exhausted but resolute. The storm had nearly broken her, but it had also revealed something stronger than fear. The fierce, unyielding love that no bat, no debt, no mistake could shatter. The weeks that followed felt like a second life for Angela. Her arm healed slowly, her ribs tender, but the deeper wounds, the ones of shame and exhaustion, began to mend in ways she hadn't expected. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to rest. She let others carry some of the weight she had always held alone. Marcus kept his promise. He rose early every morning, pulling on steel-toe boots and joining Richard's crew. At first, he grumbled about the hours, the sweat, the monotony of hauling supplies. But with each paycheck, each nod of respect from the men beside him, something inside him shifted. He began to see himself not as the boy who failed, but as the man who was learning to stand. One night, as Angela sat sewing in her chair, Marcus placed an envelope on the table. "What's this?" she asked. "First savings," he said, his voice steady. "For Lena's college, for our future. I don't want to take any more. I want to give back." Angela's eyes blurred with tears. She reached for his hand and squeezed it. "You're finding your way, baby. I'm proud." Lena, meanwhile, blossomed. With Richard's quiet support, never flashy, never forced, she applied for a scholarship program at the community center. Her essays, full of honesty about struggle and hope, caught the attention of the review board. When the acceptance letter came, Angela wept harder than she had the night Marcus was born. Richard stood beside them through it all, not as a savior, but as something rarer, a constant presence. He attended Lena's scholarship banquet, clapping the loudest. He guided Marcus on job sites, teaching him not only the trade, but also the discipline of patience. And for Angela, he became a friend who never asked her to be less strong than she was, but reminded her she didn't always have to be strong alone. One evening, as the sun sank behind the rooftops, the four of them gathered in the backyard. The grill smoked, the kids laughed, and Angela sat watching it all with quiet wonder. "You know what I see when I look at this family?" Richard said. Angela tilted her head. "What?" "I see scars," he replied, "but not the kind that shame us, the kind that remind us we survived, the kind that show we were strong enough to keep going." Angela smiled, the lines around her eyes deep but warm. Scars into strength. She looked at her children, the son who had stumbled but risen, the daughter who had dreamed beyond her circumstances, and felt a peace she hadn't known since David was alive. Maybe this wasn't the life she imagined, but it was the life she had built. And it was enough. As the evening faded, Angela whispered a prayer of gratitude, for survival, for second chances, for unexpected connections that became family. And as laughter carried through the night, she knew the storm had not broken them. It had rebuilt them. Thank you, dear readers, for walking this journey with Angela and her family. Life is never free of storms, but may we all find the strength to turn our scars into courage and our burdens into bridges. I wish you and your loved ones health, peace, and the kind of happiness that lasts inside your homes and inside your hearts.